Thank you for being here. I'm honored to be here with my colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, to talk about an important bipartisan breakthrough, in my view, a major promising development in seeking effective action against gun violence, reaching across the aisle and developing solutions that are common sense, preserve due process, and effectively save lives. We're happy to have not only bipartisan support here in the Senate, but also in the House, where an effort is being led by Congressman Fred Upton and my Connecticut colleague, Elizabeth Esty, and others along with them. The House is voting right now, which is preventing them from being here. I'm still hopeful that perhaps they'll be able to join us, but in any event, we're going to be working together to make sure that this legislation has a fair chance and is adopted. The Parkland shooting illustrates why this law is important. There were plenty of warning signs that Nicholas Cruz was a danger. There were people who obeyed the adage, if you see something, say something. The FBI received tips, so did local law enforcement, that Nicholas Cruz was, in fact, threatening to do violence with guns. They said something, but nobody did anything. And the reason is that there were lacking effective tools to prevent that shooter from having or purchasing firearms that were then used for the mass slaughter that took place at Stoneman Douglas High School. We need to ensure that when law enforcement has solid evidence that someone is in crisis, that they are a danger to themselves or others, there is a process for protecting them and the public that may be at risk. And that's why Senator Graham and I are here today, to establish legislation that would create a federal risk protection order, in effect a red flag, for a federal court to issue an order that denies a person the ability to purchase or have weapons that may be used to harm himself or others. In that way, law enforcement and family members can save lives and prevent injuries. Our bill is narrowly tailored to deal with people who demonstrate solid factual evidence that they are in fact dangerous. It provides due process insofar as the initial order must be based on such evidence, and it lasts for only 72 hours. People have a right to challenge the initial order, and they have a right as well to seek mental health care. In fact, the Connecticut experience is really powerful. The Connecticut law, on average, results in about 100 to 150 people every year not having weapons. But it also means that they are able to receive mental health care in more than half the cases. So it is a way of making sure that people who need mental health care are at least afforded the opportunity. The model for this law is Indiana. And the experience of Indiana shows as well that this law works to save lives. And let me just conclude by saying we know these laws work. We know that federal magistrates or judges can effectively perform this function. The amount of work for those federal judicial officers will be limited in scope and magnitude. There will be no excessive burden on them. And we know that states with the strongest laws, like Connecticut, are at the mercy of states with the weakest ones, because guns and shooters cross borders. There's nothing to prevent them from going from one state to another. And that's why a federal solution is important. A federal protection risk order or red flag will help to save lives.
Well, I want to thank Senator Blumenthal for working with us to find a product that I think makes a lot of sense to me. We tell our citizens, if you see something, say something. Isn't it incumbent upon the government to do something? So I think most Americans are telling us, why can't you do something? So mentally unstable people with access to firearms is a national problem. It's not a state problem. We see it all over the country. Dylan Roof did not go to a schoolhouse. He went to Mother Emanuel Church and he killed 9 parishioners. What have I learned from the Parkland episode? That the system failed at multiple levels. And I'm trying to work with Senator Blumenthal and others to address what I think would have been the biggest change of all, giving tools to the community and law enforcement officials to identify this shooter before he shot. He did everything but take an ad out in the paper, I'm going to kill people. 30 visits by the local police to this individual, and nothing happened. Until yesterday, there was no law in place in Florida. The FBI was told he's going to shoot the place up. Nobody did anything. My hope is that these 17 young people will not have died in vain. That there will be in place in every state, not 5 states, the ability of law enforcement organizations and family members to go to the courts to get help before it's too late. And the burdens here are real. I own an AR-15. I did not focus on the gun. We've got differences about that. To me, he was going to kill, no matter what. He just chose the AR-15. Wouldn't it be nice if somebody could have grabbed this man and said, what are you up to? And taken every gun he had away from him and every other device that could kill somebody and get him some help before it was too late. So after 30 visits by the local police, after the FBI was informed on a tip line, nothing happened because there was no system in place. If this becomes law, every state will have an opportunity to go to a federal judge or magistrate and inform them that this person is about to blow. And you've got to prove initially by probable cause standard in the law enough to issue a warrant that the person needs a restraining order. And after 72 hours, a hearing will be available where the person can defend themselves, saying they got it wrong. And to continue the order, you have to prove by clear and convincing evidence that the person is a danger to themselves or others. So this is not about losing your gun rights easily. This is about intervening at a time it would matter. I'm not worried about this law affecting me as an AR-15 owner at all. If somebody says I'm crazy, maybe the best evidence of all is I'm in Congress. I'm not worried about lawful gun owners. They'll be fine. What I am worried about is a system that can't detect the cruises and the roofs of the world and do something about it. It would be great if 50 states had 50 different ways of doing this. That would be fine with me. Right now, there's a huge gap in our law. And I feel compelled, after all this violence, to do something that makes sense. It makes sense to me to empower our judiciary with the ability to do something before it's too late, consistent with due process, consistent with constitutional rights of lawful gun owners. And I would say to my colleagues, if you don't like this, fine. What are you for? Because doing nothing does not serve this country well.
Yep.
Senator, and I guess it's for both of you, since you mentioned the due process aspect of this, what sort of, I mean, obviously in this case in Parkland there seemed to be a lot, but what sort of evidence would you have to present to a judge to get this
Well, great question. The question is what kind of evidence, but it's also what kind of process. Both are important. And the kind of evidence would be exactly the kind of evidence that was apparent in Parkland. Those threats, the kinds of very explicit warnings, direct evidence of what the individual may be saying, evidence of shooting animals, as was apparent in Parkland, is a classic piece of evidence that indicates dangerousness. There are indicia. Law enforcement experts and others can point to indicia of dangerousness. But I think as important as the kind of evidence and the specific facts is the standard. That standard of clear and convincing evidence is tougher than any state statute. The set of steps that are guaranteed is stronger than, for example, the Indiana statute, which was passed overwhelmingly by the legislature and then signed by a Republican governor. So this is a pretty tight process. And then even when the permanent, in quotes, permanent order is issued, it's permanent only for 180 days. And then the burden is on the petitioner, whether it's law enforcement or family, to come forward with more evidence. So if people say, I'm losing gun rights, they're not losing rights. They continue to have that right all the way along to retrieve the guns and to have the order vacated at any point in those 180 days.
Can I just give you some details here? Probable cause is the initial standard. It's the same thing you'd have to do to get an arrest warrant or a search warrant. So it's a criminal standard, even though this is not a criminal action. And you got to prove there's a risk of imminent personal injury to the person himself or herself or others. So that's the standard. You'd have to prove to a federal judge or magistrate that the threat is imminent. The person's either going to kill themselves or use a gun to commit a violent act against others. There is a right under the Constitution for all of us to be protected against people who are dangerous. That to me is, you got to balance everything. So I think we struck the right balance. There are 5 states with laws like this, and I will say to Dick's credit, we erred on the side of more due process, not less, because none of us want somebody, you can be in a domestic argument and, you know, spouses say bad things about each other. This is a real burden here.
Senator, your colleagues Nelson and Rubio held a press conference yesterday where they unveiled essentially a watered-down version of this bill that would encourage states to enact these laws. And when they were asked why not go farther and do what you're proposing today, Mr. Rubio essentially said he didn't believe that there would be the support for it to pass Congress. So the question to you is, does this bill have a chance?
You know, I talked to Senator Rubio this morning, and you know, I think he may have made the point that this law will be more difficult than their proposal, which provides only vague incentives for the states to act. In my view, the most powerful incentive for the states to act is an aroused and outraged public. The young people marching in the streets, carrying signs that say, "Our blood, your hands," are more powerful than the minimal grants that would be provided under that law. But we will be advancing a measure that will provide even more incentives for states to act. We want the states to act. This measure provides a federal gap-filling law, a safety net. We have a national obligation to protect people, and the federal courts have an obligation to do their job as well in protecting people from truly dangerous people that can be identified beforehand. Prevention here is the key word.
So I will support a state incentive program, but we're just not going to write checks unless there's something meaningful done. I think most Americans believe that there should have been a system in place to do something about Nicholas Cruz before he went into the school, given all the information. All I can tell the country is that we're giving you that venue. If there's a better way to do it, fine. I am not against their idea. I am for this idea. If this idea doesn't get enough votes, then we'll come up with something that will give a venue to people to stop the Nicholas Cruzes of the future.
Senator Graham.
Senator Graham.
Yeah.
Could you address the kind of logistical aspect of getting gun legislation to the floor, whether it's your bill or Senator Cornyn's bill or Senator Rubio's bill? The issue of what is the possibility of gun legislation coming back to the floor? What is the majority leader telling you about this?
You know, I don't know what Mitch's game plan is in terms of how we deal with this. We're going to have a hearing next week. That's a good thing. And I think find a Democrat and Republican, come up with an idea. Ideas are a good thing. I think the president's key here. I think the president's got to tell us what he wants, urge the majority leader and the Speaker of the House to take up an agenda that can be added to. But I would urge the president, you did a very good job in that meeting. The White House, if they came out with a proposal, I think that would jumpstart the process.
Yeah, I just want to say the president, as you may recall, actually spoke favorably of this kind of proposal.
Yeah, he did.
He
That's why we
referred
did
to
it.
he referred to a red flag law. Here we have a red flag law. Mr. President, where are you?
Mr.
Did you get
Senator
any
Graham.
assurances, though, from Mike Pence when you talked to him about this provision, that he would embrace this? based that it was
I
based on his
talked to Mike, and I learned a lot. It happened before he was governor. There's a reason for every law, for the most part. A man was released from a mental health institution in Indiana. There was no system to deny him the ability to purchase a weapon. It didn't get into the background system. And he went out, got a gun, and killed some cops. Literally overnight, they passed a law allowing a judge with the appropriate legal standard to deny somebody who is mentally unstable from having a weapon. Curtis Hill, the Attorney General of Indiana, suggested that we look at their law. I did. The president suggested that we come up with some type intervention system, and we're giving due process before, during, and after. So this is, I think, very constitutionally compliant. So I don't know where the vice president will be, but it seems to have worked in Indiana.
Senator Graham, can you expand on what you were saying about President Trump's role in this? And if you could address a little bit of how difficult it is to get on this, or tariffs, or immigration, or any of these other issues, to get the president nailed down to make it easier for you and Congress to move forward?
Well, I want to just tell the president that the hearing he had, or the meeting he had, was good. I think the country wants their president to address problems that our nation faces as a whole. So he brought in Republicans and Democrats, and he had a very in-depth discussion that made everybody nervous somewhere along the line. And that's fine with me. I'm just trying to meet the challenge. I mean, the president said, do something. Give me some ideas. He mentioned a restraining order process. His vice president in the state of Indiana, they have something that I think makes a lot of sense. I just want to have a venue right now that doesn't exist in 45 states to interdict the next Nicholas Cruz. As to the president, tell us what you're for. Do you like this? You don't like this? If you don't like it, tell us why. I'm open-minded to changing it. No pride of authorship here. But I'm 62 years old. I've been a prosecutor. I'm a defense attorney. I am tired of going home and telling people, well, you just can't do anything.
And the most common thing, if you're out there in Connecticut, the most common thing people say to us is, why can't you stop these people from having guns? However you refer to them, deeply troubled or something more dramatic, why can't you stop these people from having guns? And that's a legitimate question for the American people to ask of the federal government. And what we're saying here is a federal judicial officer ought to be empowered to prevent truly dangerous people, imminent risk, people in crisis, not just, oh, he's acting strange. No, he's beating his wife, and he's got an arsenal of guns in his house. That's the most frequent occurrence, by the way, in Connecticut when it's been used.
Can I ask a follow-up about that? Are you worried at all about the situation you put law enforcement officers in to send them to the homes of what you just described as truly dangerous people with arsenals full of guns in crisis to take their guns away?
I am very worried, and I don't know whether you saw any of the testimony yesterday at our roundtable by the chief of police for Prince George's County. He recently lost one of his men because they went to a domestic dispute. Police have to go to domestic disputes now where there are arsenals of weapons trying to intervene to enforce the law. This kind of measure will help save their lives too. I worry about them in these types of situations, but the best way to protect them is to give them the power to seek orders that remove these weapons when they pose a real risk to relatives, family, and to law enforcement.
Can I just answer that more directly? I think most cops would rather take the bullet than a kid. See, the one thing I like about cops the most is that they do things to put themselves in danger so the rest of us can sleep well at night. Walking up to a car in a dark, secluded road in Connecticut or South Carolina in the middle of the night, not knowing who's in the car, is a very dangerous thing. Executing a restraining order that a judge found probable cause the person may kill themselves or somebody else is a dangerous endeavor. But police officers accept that danger. Here's what I think. I think most police officers in the country would welcome a chance to go intervene before a lot of people are killed.
Senators, on the topic of presidential leadership, the president today is meeting with video game producers. I just wanted to ask you, how relevant do you think the topic of violent video games and things like that are to this conversation of stemming gun violence?
Extremely relevant. I want to look at everything. I compliment the president for looking at the cultural aspects of this. But the First Amendment exists. I don't know how far you can go in banning a video. I don't know how far you can go in banning a movie. What books you should read that incite violence. The First Amendment is real, but it has limitations. So one of the reasons I want the CDC to look at the root of gun violence is to find out what drives all this. How much of it is mental health? How much of it is cultural? How much of it is the type gun? So I compliment the president for looking at the violent nature of some of the videos and movies that are out there, but I caution the American people. Just as Second Amendment people believe they have a constitutional right, they do. There's also a First Amendment right. And so there's limits to what the government can do, the Second Amendment and the First Amendment, but here's what we can't do any longer. Nothing. Nothing is unacceptable.
Nothing is unacceptable, but I want to be very clear. We're not taking people's guns away just because they play violent video games. We're not taking people's guns away, in fact, for any non-objective reason. We're not really taking people's guns away. We're preventing them from having them or buying them. And, you know, to go to the point about presidential leadership, there is the temptation to say, oh, well, that meeting down at the White House was just a reality show. Nothing will come of it. A lot of rhetoric, words. Now is the time for the president to demonstrate there will be action by approving a measure like this one and others that effectively do something. Not for show, but for real effect.
And you brought up the next bill I'm working on is social media. Now, we tell the social media to shut down jihadist websites because terrorism, they recruit on the internet. What about a social media's obligation to report to the police a threat? Now, they've got to know about it, but I want to look at everything. So this guy is posting on his Facebook page, I'm going to go down there and kill everybody. There's some obligation, I think, to the social media world to be part of the solution, too.
And we'll come back and announce that together as well.
Senator Graham, since there is no plan to debate this right now and the elections are coming up, do you see a risk that the Senate will never do this year, we'll never have a debate on it?
I'm not going to go into my election saying I didn't do something. To the politicians who believe that you're going to be rewarded for punting on this, I think you're making a huge mistake. To the politicians who overreach, I think you're making a huge mistake. Senator Blumenthal and I come from very different states when it comes to the gun culture. We're on 90% of the time on the opposite sides of each other when it comes to what to do about gun violence. We found commonality here. And I think most Americans would appreciate us doing something about the most obvious problem in the Parkland shooting. Why didn't you do something before he went into the school, given all the information you had that he was going to blow up? He literally did everything but take an ad out in the paper. You don't lose your gun rights under this bill unless a judge is convinced in 2 separate occasions by relatively strong legal standards you're a danger to yourself or others. Suicides have gone down in states with these laws because the most likely victim of somebody who's mentally unstable is themselves. But in this case, you saw it was not just limited to him. It was limited to 17 people going to school. We just owe it. Florida did it, okay? Florida did it. Florida's got a version of this. Congratulations to Florida. But there's a gap in our law, and I want to fill it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.